Hey guys, good morning to you. I hope you guys slept well and everything's okay at your homes. I realize it's the first day of our, at minimum, 2 week break from school. So this is going to be my first real attempt at trying to stream some information to you that'll coincide with the Darren Brown video on obedience in regards to the recreation of Stanley Milgram's original experiment back in the 1960s. Since we can't have a typical question and answer session like we normally would in class, I decided it would be in our best interest to try and at least get a little bit of me teaching you what can be some fairly complex concepts within the experiment itself. I'm hoping you guys will watch this after you have read through the Stanley Milgram reading that I have given you, entitled The Perils of Obedience, and the other item being the video conducted by Darren Brown, in which is a recreation of the original Stanley Milgram experiment. There are a couple things that I want to highlight before I dive into what I think is important from the video. The first thing is what was the catalyst for Milgram conducting the experiment. The biggest thing to draw from it is that his parents were miraculously Jewish refugees and were able to survive the absolutely horrible things that occurred during the Holocaust in World War II Germany. Because of that, he wanted to see how far people would go with listening to authority figures. So he created a relatively simple experiment in which the individual, the subject that is being tested, is absolutely free to stop the experiment whenever they so choose. They just don't know it. There are several layers of deception that are used in this particular experiment. Deception is a psychological term that more or less is a fancy way of saying we're going to lie to you for now and we'll tell you the truth later on. One of the first things you'll notice that is based on deception within the experiment itself is the fact that the scientist and the learner are part of the experiment, though the individual who is the teacher, who the experiment is really on, is the only part of the experiment that's being tested. Because the scientist and the learner, the guy receiving the shocks, are part of the experiment, they are called Confederates. Confederates is a psychological term for saying that you are part of the experiment itself. They have a script that they have to stick to. They cannot alter that script. They cannot change that script. The only thing that'll wind up changing in this experiment will wind up being how the teacher, the person who the experiment is on, will react to the situation. The second level or layer of deception that is used in this particular experiment is the fact that the teacher believes that they are actually shocking that person on the other side of the wall. In the original experiment, as well as in the recreation that you guys just viewed, no one was being hurt. The teacher is led to believe that the shocks are supposed to be used for how punishment affects learning. That's also a means of deception. They are lied to for now, that they believe that this learner is supposed to pick up on word pairs, and if they get it wrong, they're going to be zapped and shocked. That's not true. No one is being hurt. The only person that felt any amount of electricity was that little tiny sample zap that was given to the teacher prior to the experiment beginning. Another form of deception is the box that is in front of the teacher. While it looks incredibly realistic, there is no electricity coming from that box. No one is being hurt, especially the learner on the other side of the wall. And the final layer of deception winds up being the responses that the teacher gets from the learner. They are scripted. They are the exact same responses every time, as was what you guys read in both the article by Stanley Milgram as well as the YouTube clip. The responses are played via an audio tape, and every time the learner mistakenly gets it wrong, which is scripted, he will yell out, "Ow, that hurts, I'd like to stop," until it winds up getting into more serious things like, "I have a heart condition, we need to stop this experiment." And ultimately, at the highest levels, there will be no response And the teacher is instructed at that point to treat it as if the individual was wrong and to continue to keep shocking that person. So the experiment itself is actually a very simple one. All Milgram was looking for, and all the individuals in the YouTube clip you watched were looking for, is to see how far someone would go just because a guy wearing a white lab coat has told them to. The gentleman in the white lab coat never raises his voice. The gentleman in the lab coat doesn't yell. He doesn't intimidate. All he states is that we must continue going on with the experiment. They are very simplistic instructions, and the teacher is allowed to stop the experiment whenever they so choose. They will feel some bit of conflict with the scientist, but if they make their voice loud enough saying, I don't think I want to continue this, or however it is they want to say it, they're more than welcome to stop the experiment. Another very large portion of the experiment is what you see on the teacher's face, the one that the experiment is on. Throughout the original experiment, as well as in the video clip that you watched, you see a lot of stress on their face because you know what they are doing is wrong. That person appears to be very much at odds within their own body. Their thought process is, I can't hurt a stranger just because someone is telling me to. But their actions don't actually line up exactly the way that they should. This is a concept called cognitive dissonance. This concept says that your actions and your thought processes or behaviors don't really line up with one another. In this case, it winds up being, I don't want to hurt a stranger, but I'll keep hurting a stranger. In other cases, it may wind up being something as simple as someone who swears that they're never ever going to go to some type of large get-together or party, and then all of a sudden they're convinced by their friends to go to that party. Or if it winds up being that you only have a couple $1,000s to spend for a used car, but you wind up weighing and going and back and forth, and you wind up spending more than your couple $1,000s for your used car. Cognitive dissonance is a very, very simplistic thing that takes on very, very large ramifications. At the end of the experiment, psychologists were asked to predict how many people they thought would actually go all the way through with killing that person on the other side of the wall, administering lethal electric shocks. The original experimentation was that 0.1%, which is an incredibly, almost non-existent population. And they were wrong, much like they explained in the YouTube clip. Over 50% of people will continue to go all the way through with the highest level of shocks just because someone in a white lab coat has told them to. It is amazing to see how well many of us respond to authority. And as long as we have someone else to blame our actions on, the scientist in the other side of the room, if we can rationalize, then it winds up being a very, very simplistic way of showing why things like World War II Germany and other types of genocides and horrific acts continue to happen. It should be noted that in the original experiment, Milgram never debriefed his participants, the individuals who are in the teacher role. And because he didn't debrief, several of them went home and committed suicide afterwards. It was an incredibly unethical thing to do. In the YouTube clip that you guys watched, as it got towards the end of it, they did debrief. They told them that no one was hurt, there was no electric shocks being passed on the person on the other side of the wall, and therefore everyone was just safe, that they were being tested to see how far they would go. And you can kind of see that wave of relief on their face when they realize, thank goodness, I didn't really hurt anyone. They feel an immense amount of burden and guilt leading up to it, but almost immediately afterwards, they feel infinitely better knowing that this person is safe and that they haven't hurt that stranger. You almost get that sense of embarrassment that they can't believe they did such awful things just because someone told them to. My hope that this short video clip of me has helped to make sense of the video clip regarding the Darren Brown, as well as the readings on Stanley Milgram's Perils of Obedience. If you guys should have any questions, you know how to reach out to me. Be good to one another, take care of yourselves, and thanks for popping in, guys.